Story 1. Mr. Thompson and his missing family. We lived in a small house with a white picket fence, but our neighbour's house was different, bigger, newer, and always spotless. It looked out of place. The owner, Mr. Thompson, was a wealthy man who lived there with his wife, Mrs. Thompson, and their 2-year-old daughter, Emma. Mr. Thompson was an odd man. He didn't speak much and kept to himself. But what stood out the most was his obsession with his car. He owned a sleek black sports car, the kind you only see in magazines. Every weekend, without fail, he would be outside polishing and cleaning it as if it were made of gold, spending hours making sure every inch was perfect. Sometimes, I would watch him from my window, wondering why a car could mean so much to someone. Mrs. Thompson was the complete opposite of her husband, always kind and friendly, often waving at me when she passed by. Sometimes she would even stop to chat, asking about school or offering me some of the cookies she baked. Emma was a happy little girl, always giggling and playing in their yard. The sight of them together was comforting, a rare bit of warmth in our otherwise quiet neighborhood. But then, one day, everything changed. Mrs. Thompson and Emma disappeared. It was like they vanished into thin air. I remember the day the police came to our door, asking if we had seen Mrs. Thompson or Emma. They said Mr. Thompson reported them missing, claiming his wife had left him and taken their daughter with her. My parents were shocked, but there wasn't much we could tell the police. We hadn't seen anything unusual, and like everyone else, we just assumed Mrs. Thompson had left on her own. Weeks passed, then months, and there was no sign of them. The whole town buzzed with rumors, each one wilder than the last. Some said Mrs. Thompson ran away with another man, while others whispered about something far darker. I tried to push it out of my mind, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Every time I saw Mr. Thompson polishing his car, a chill ran down my spine. It felt wrong, like he was trying to distract himself from something horrible. One day, a few months after Mrs. Thompson and Emma had disappeared, something strange happened. My dad was in the garage fixing up his old truck when he noticed something odd in Mr. Thompson's garage. The door was slightly open, and inside, barely visible, was Mrs. Thompson's white SUV. It was covered in dust, like it hadn't been touched in months. My dad called my mum and me over to see, and we all stood there staring at it in shock. If Mrs. Thompson had run away, why would her car still be here? A few days later, we noticed the SUV was gone. Mr. Thompson had sold it, or at least that's what we guessed. He didn't say anything to us, but the way he started acting was even stranger. He stopped going outside as much, and when he did, he seemed nervous, constantly looking over his shoulder like he was being watched. The once spotless car now had a layer of dirt on it, and his yard, which used to be immaculate, was beginning to look neglected. Then, one night, something happened that I'll never forget. My parents and I were having dinner when we heard a loud crash from Mr. Thompson's house. My dad grabbed a flashlight and told us to stay inside as he went to check it out. From the window, I watched him walk across the yard and knock on Mr. Thompson's door. It took a long time for Mr. Thompson to answer, and when he did, he looked pale, almost sick. My dad asked if everything was okay, but Mr. Thompson just nodded and said he had dropped something. My dad came back inside, but he looked unsettled. He told us he had seen something strange when Mr. Thompson opened the door. In the dim light of the hallway, he saw a pot of some kind of liquid on the stove, and next to it, a gun on the kitchen counter. He couldn't explain it, but something about the scene had disturbed him deeply. After that night, things seemed to spiral out of control. Mr. Thompson became even more reclusive, and the whispers around town grew louder. Some people believed he had done something terrible to his wife and daughter, but there was no evidence, no proof, just suspicion and fear. I started having nightmares about it, about what might have happened behind those closed doors. The thought that something terrible might have taken place so close to home was terrifying. Years have passed since then, and I've grown up, moved away, and tried to leave those memories behind. But now and then, I think about Mrs. Thompson and Emma. I wonder what happened to them, where they are now, and if they ever found safety. I'll never forget the sight of that white SUV in the garage. The look on Mr. Thompson's face when my dad knocked on his door, or the fear that gripped our town in the months that followed. Sometimes, late at night, when the world is quiet, I still feel that chill running down my spine. I'll never know for sure, but I fear the worst, and I hope, wherever they are, that Mrs. Thompson and Emma are safe, far away from the man who spent so much time polishing his car. Story 2: The Strange Delivery. I had been delivering food for a few months now, driving around the city and getting to know every corner of it. Most nights were routine: pick up the order, follow the GPS, drop it off, and move on to the next one. But this night was different. It was late, maybe past midnight, and I had just received an order from a part of town I didn't recognize. The GPS led me away from the familiar roads and into a neighborhood I had never seen before. The houses were spaced far apart, and the streets seemed to twist and turn in ways that didn't make sense. Each corner I turned seemed to take me deeper into a maze of narrow roads and dark alleys. The streetlights were few and far between, casting long, eerie shadows that made the entire area feel off. The further I drove, the more I felt like something was wrong. The roads didn't seem to match up with the map on my phone. I would make a turn, and suddenly the GPS would tell me to turn back, as if the streets were changing while I drove. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter, a sense of unease growing in the pit of my stomach. But I knew I had to deliver the order. That was the job. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the GPS announced that I had arrived. I slowed the car and looked at the house. It stood at the end of a cul-de-sac, a tall, narrow building with peeling paint and broken windows. The lawn was overgrown, the grass reaching up to my knees, and there was no sign of life. It looked abandoned. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the gear shift, ready to put the car in reverse and get out of there. But then I thought about the order, about the customer waiting for their food. Maybe it was just an old house and someone still lived there. Maybe they were just too busy or too tired to fix it up. I tried to shake off the unease that clung to me like a cold fog. I got out of the car, taking the bag of food with me. The air was thick and heavy, almost suffocating as I walked toward the house. The gravel crunched under my feet, the only sound in the silent night. The closer I got, the more I felt like I was being watched. My skin prickled with the sensation of a chill running down my spine. When I reached the porch, I noticed the front door was slightly ajar. It creaked open with the slightest push, revealing a dark hallway that stretched into the unknown. I could barely see a few feet inside, the darkness swallowing everything beyond that. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling slightly. There was no answer, just the echo of my voice bouncing back at me from the empty hall. Something deep inside me screamed to leave, to drop the food and run back to the car, but I took another step forward, peering into the darkness. That's when I heard it. A faint rustling sound, like leaves being dragged across the ground. I turned to look back at the street, and that's when I saw them. Figures emerged from the shadows, stepping out from between the houses and around the corners. They moved silently, almost like they were gliding across the ground. My heart started pounding in my chest, each beat echoing in my ears as they got closer. The first one stepped into the dim light of the porch, and I could see it. It was a person, but their face was hidden behind a blank white mask. The mask had no features, just smooth, cold porcelain. The others followed, all wearing the same eerie, expressionless masks. They surrounded me, their presence pressing in on me from all sides. I tried to back away, but I was trapped against the porch railing. My breath came in quick, shallow gasps, my mind racing for a way out. One of them reached out, and I flinched, dropping the bag of food to the ground. Their hands were cold as ice as they grabbed me, pulling me toward the house. I struggled, trying to break free, but they were too strong. The more I fought, the tighter their grip became. They didn't say a word, didn't make a sound as they dragged me inside. The door slammed shut behind us, plunging me into darkness. I was blind, my other senses taking over. I could hear their footsteps around me, soft but purposeful. I could feel their cold hands on me, searching through my pockets, taking my wallet, my phone, and my keys. I wanted to scream, to call for help, but the sound died in my throat. It was as if the darkness had swallowed my voice. My mind was spinning, trying to make sense of what was happening, but nothing made sense. All I could feel was the overwhelming dread, the terror that gripped me as they continued to strip me of everything I had. Finally, they let go of me, and I collapsed to the floor, trembling. I could hear their footsteps fading away, the creak of the door opening and closing again, and they were gone, leaving me alone in the pitch-black house. I stayed there for what felt like hours, too scared to move. My mind replayed the events over and over, trying to understand, but there was no understanding. It was like I had stepped into another world, a place where the rules didn't apply, where nothing made sense. Eventually, I forced myself to stand up, my legs shaking beneath me. I found the door, pushed it open, and stumbled out into the night. The street was empty, no sign of the masked figures, no sign of anyone. My car was still there, untouched, as if nothing had happened. I had been robbed, not just of my belongings, but of something more, my sense of safety, my trust in the world around me. I drove away from that house as fast as I could, the streets still twisting and turning, leading me in circles until I finally found my way out. When I reached the main road, I didn't look back. I just kept driving, trying to escape the memory of those blank masks, of the cold hands that had pulled me into the darkness. But I knew, no matter how far I drove, I would never truly escape. The fear would always be there, lurking just out of sight, waiting to drag me back into that twisting, endless nightmare. Thanks for joining me on this journey into the night. If you enjoyed the hunt and want to see more adventures, don't forget to hit that like button. And if you want to stay updated on all our midnight mysteries, make sure to subscribe and ring that bell. Your support helps us uncover more secrets and bring you thrilling new content every week. Until next time, stay curious and keep hunting. This is The Midnight Hunt, signing off.